Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Lab to Impact series from the Center for Technology Licensing at Cornell University in Weill Cornell Medicine. I'm Donna Rounds, and I'm thrilled to be your host for what I hope will be an inspiring and insightful discussion with our panel of distinguished experts. To our audience here, your engagement is an integral part of our session, and I encourage you to share your thoughts and questions using the chat and the Q&A features, and we'll weave them into the discussion as much as possible. So let's make this collaborative and inspiring. So today we're exploring the critical intersection of medical device innovation and regulatory guidance, a journey from breakthrough research to patient-ready technology. And our distinguished panel brings a 360 perspective on medical device development. We have a biotech CEO who recently navigated the 510(k) clearance process, a clinician and lab head who transformed research into an approved device, and a former FDA director who has shaped the regulatory landscape. Let me briefly introduce everybody and then give them the opportunity to go a bit deeper. So Dr. Jason Spector, Chief of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery here at Weill Cornell Medicine. He's a serial inventor, entrepreneur, and founder of several companies, including Facerius Therapeutics, which in January received the FDA clearance on DermaSphere. Speaking of Facerius, let me introduce Tom Richey, the CEO of Facerius, who has over 30 years of experience in early and growth stage companies, and Tom's a leader with a proven track record in steering device development and commercialization. And finally, I'm pleased to welcome Mark Milkerson, a more than 20-year veteran of the FDA, serving across a spectrum of the medical device division. Mark has seen the evolving regulatory landscape with a focus on regulatory compliance and processes. And together, I hope this dynamic trio will unpack the complex path from scientific discovery to market-ready medical innovation. So turning a bit to balancing innovation with regulatory compliance and focusing with Jason, in my long career of working with innovators, I can say there's only a few like Jason who are serial inventors, entrepreneurs, always open to the new innovations. So Jason, tell us a bit more about your background, your creative process, and the inspirations and the crucial early decisions that you make to enable eventual regulatory approval of your device. You're on mute.
But thank you, Donna, for that very wonderful introduction. And it's been a pleasure working with you and the team over these many years. And, you know, my background as a reconstructive plastic surgeon really allows me to see the true broadest spectrum of surgical needs. As a plastic surgeon, we operate with nearly every surgical specialty, so I'm exposed to unmet, needs and gaps in treatment, literally all over the body, inside and out. And so, again, as somebody who's interested not only in the clinical portion, but in translating interesting findings to the clinic, that's just always been something that I've wanted to do. And I've been fortunate that some of those ideas, in particular this one we're talking about today, was able to take that long and winding path from an interesting observation to realizing maybe there's something about this interesting observation that can improve patient outcomes, and then maybe there's something that I can do from a commercialization standpoint to make that happen. So, just like anything, you have to chance favors the prepared mind. And I can't say I'm always looking for something specifically, but a lot of times, just if you observe a lot, sometimes things come to you. And that's a common thread, I think, amongst, people who do invent or develop things, is it's not necessarily you're focused on the one thing, but something comes in front of you and you recognize that maybe it's got some legs to it.
You've got a proven track record of successful medical device development. Tell us a bit more about your previous successes and maybe walk us a bit through your accomplishments at Facerius and the key milestones and timeline of your recent 510(k) clearance process, particularly highlighting maybe the decision points that impacted your success.
Sure. Thanks, Don. I appreciate the chance to be on the panel. Yeah, I got my background. Gosh, I've been very fortunate to kind of be at that intersection of highly disruptive technologies. I've never been the inventor of them, but I've been fortunate enough to participate along the way. First one was in orthopedics, sports medicine, when we were converting over from open surgery to arthroscopic surgery. Second was the intersection of open heart surgery to interventional cardiology, game-changing dynamics, innovations, driving whole market conversions. Prior to joining Fresenius, I was with a therapeutics company developing a library of synthetic growth factors, so kind of an off-the-shelf solution for biologics. And that was one of the very first combination products that the FDA regulated. Actually, Mark Malkerson's group was reviewing that for us in the late mid 90s, I guess. So I got the opportunity to kind of run the gamut of low regulated products, medium regulated products, very highly regulated products through the FDA, and each of those with highly disruptive technologies. The chance to do it again here at Fresenius has been intriguing, very intriguing for us. It's a technology that is meeting a huge need that has been established in the market for 30, 40 years. Finally, someone has discovered, Jason and his group have been innovative in their thinking to define a technology that I think will disrupt this market as well. But it also has the benefit of taking kind of that medium regulatory route. And Donna, you mentioned our recent 510K approval. So we did take that strategy, and that really is started with a process actually predated me joining Fresenius, but it started with the pre-sub process, where you actually go to the FDA early, expose them to kind of your thinking around what you are envisioning for regulatory structure for the company, and then you ask questions and you allow the FDA to kind of offer their early advice. It's non-binding, but it's an kind of advisory process that allows them to see what you're doing, get involved with you, collaborate, chat with you about some things to think about, pitfalls, areas that they're going to be asking questions about in the formal submission. We did that in late 2021. And what allows you to do is kind of confirm your regulatory strategy, what your risk profiles are going to be, and how you're going to think about going to market going forward. So for us, that allowed us to confirm the 510K regulatory path was the critical path. It was a critical path for us. And it also allows you to kind of determine for us, well, at the time for us, a go-no-go strategy on how do we manufacture a product. Is this something we're going to have to spend a lot of time on, or can we engage early in the manufacturing process? So it's what allowed us to move forward rapidly. That led to a formal so a whole lot of testing, obviously, and then our formal 510K submission June 30th, actually, of 2024, which triggers kind of a formal review process and then an interactive review process with the agency, which obviously Mark can speak to better than I. But for us specifically in this, we felt pretty strongly about how we were approaching the science, the best science for this. In the interactive process, we got some pushback from our review team that were asking us for something that we didn't particularly agree with. And so that kind of left us with an inflection of, do we try to convince the FDA of our pathway is the better science, or do we acquiesce and say, okay, we'll run the science that the FDA wants us to run and deal with the ramifications of that? For us, it made sense to acquiesce and just do what the agency was asking. We didn't think it was particularly maybe the best path forward, but we did it. The outcome was cost us about an extra 4 months and probably $1 million-ish type dollars to the company. So that was the impact to us strategically, but it did obviously lead to the approval in January. So about a 3-ish year long process, which is pretty typical for a 510K, much faster than more highly regulated Class 3 products or PMA regulated products.
think we're going to come back to that theme about balancing investors with regulatory compliance. But for a moment, let's just turn to Mark. You've had a very long career at the FDA and have been involved in many, many different divisions and are now consulting in the private sector. We live in certainly interesting times, and who knows what changes may be afoot in the agency in the future. But tell us a bit about your work at the FDA and maybe some of the common oversights that you've seen in device submissions from academics and small startup companies.
Well, let me go back to my history. I started off as an undergrad researcher for a startup company that was just off campus. And then as a grad student, I was working with a company working to develop a resorbable bone plate. Up until that time, I had never even heard of the FDA or even considered it. And the funny part of it was, when you're talking about balance, the FDA was asking for certain types of data. And I agreed with them and didn't necessarily agree with the company I was working for. So we had a discussion as we went along. So I'm going full circle. I started off on your end, which was the research. How do I make this product viable and get through the FDA? And then after showing the company their resorbable bone plate wasn't a good idea the way it was designed, they pulled my research funds and I ended up working for the FDA. So for me, it was kind of a fortuitous, but a very good learning experience. But as far as dealing with the FDA, you were talking about, do you acquiesce or do you actually try to educate the staff? And I've found over the years that as a reviewer, first line manager, second line manager, and then ultimately a senior manager with the FDA, it's actually better to work with the agency. But if you have differences of opinion, voice them, but provide the information on what that's based on. So don't be afraid to disagree with the FDA, but at the same time, have the information and data upon which you're basing those opinions or positions as you're going forward. The other thing that I've seen, and again, I've gone from both sides, having your investors try to drive your research, not necessarily a good idea. Because what they want is, what's the shortest path to my quickest turnaround on my investment versus what is appropriate or necessary to deal with the product's safety and effectiveness, which is what the FDA is involved in. The other thing is trying to force your product into a regulatory path that it doesn't fit. You can't put a square peg in a round hole. Comes true with the FDA as well. There are certain regulatory paths that are a me too. I'm just like something that's already marketed. I want to go through that pathway, and you have to show that you're substantially equivalent to that product. The others is, it's new and different, and I have to show it's safe and effective in its own right. And everybody, we throw out the acronyms, the alphabet soup of PMAs, IDEs, de novo, which is the automatic reevaluation of class 3 designation as a PMA. Those are things that are regulatory paths. And Tom already mentioned the way to get started anyway through the process is through the pre-submission. Early interaction with the FDA can save you time, effort, as well as expense. Let's see, those are kind of the main issues. But the other part is, if you're trying to develop a product and you've got some questions of your own in terms of safety or effectiveness, don't hide them. Bring them out and say, here's what I'm trying to deal with. Here's how I'm proposing to address it. FDA, do you agree? Or is there something else I should be doing? And those are the types of things that basically, if you interact with the FDA, don't be afraid of them, but don't just follow them blindly, because as Tom pointed out, it can be months longer in the process, and that time is money. That's kind of my opening remarks, but I'm open for all kinds of questions.
So just we do have a first question. So talk a little bit about how you deal with the IRB when you're trying to get data for a novel device. Jason, kind of over to you. And what are some of the biggest challenges when you're aligning academic innovations with industry needs and regulatory compliance? And then, Tom and Mark, maybe you can comment on that as well, is how do you work with academics?
So, thanks, Donna. So I'll start off by saying, in my experience in this journey, one of the first things I did to make things simpler was to, cease doing any company related work in my lab. So when you ask about IRBs, it has nothing to do with IRBs, at this institution. Not to say it couldn't be done, but then you have to deal with a lot of conflicts, potential conflicts, and my opinion is there's a lot of risk adversity in that space. So what you can do from a company perspective, and again, all of these are mostly things I didn't know before entering this pathway. There's an entire industry called contract research organizations that perform research for fees, whether that research is, in vitro or whether those are animal studies. And if you want to perform animal studies at any of these contract research organizations, and when I say it's a large industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, those facilities will help facilitate the generation of an IRB. That's part of what they do. They want to do the work. They want to help you do the work. So you can usually get an IRB generated, believe it or not, within the course of a few weeks or a month. Very different from our experience in academics. So that answers that question specifically. And then just more generally, like I said, I chose not to take a pathway to do anything here. I also think, there are pros and cons of that. And if you are able to have the resources to do it outside, whether that's in your company lab or with these contract research organizations, CROs, I think that's probably the most efficient pathway.
I might layer onto that. And once you get out of the preclinical phase and you think about clinical work and clinical institutional review boards, which I've had the chance to do both. I think it's important to have an extraordinarily well-written protocol. It's all about the research that you're going to conduct, and is it viable? Does it make sense? Is it worthwhile? And is it advancing the science? And then it's all about, are you introducing safety risks or concerns into it? And especially true when you look at human clinical trials. So if you're going to do a human study, that institutional review process is going to be all about one, the champion that's promoting the IRB at the particular institution to trying to go to, or whether it's a central IRB like a Western or something. But two, then being really diligent about your protocol and addressing risk profiles, because that's what they're going to focus on, is introducing potential risk or safety issues.
And I just want to clarify one thing I said. I was talking about IACUC. I know you were asked about IRB, but I was talking about IACUCs for the preclinical animal studies. And I echo what Tom just said about IRBs in the clinical phase.
Yeah, I'll jump in from the FDA's perspective. Their main focus for IRBs are making sure the patients are receiving adequate identification of risk and what the company is doing or the clinicians are doing to minimize those risks. That's going to be their main focus. So instead of looking at the business side, they're looking at can somebody with a 7th grade education, which is the way the regs are written, able to understand what risks they may be facing and what are the potential benefits associated with this product. So FDA spends more time on what you're telling the patient than dealing with the administrative ends.
And Mark, just to build a little bit on some of what Jason and Tom have been saying, what's the burden of proof difference between doing something in the lab and doing something at the CRO and then presenting it to the FDA?
The burden isn't that much different than what you would expect. It's more common sense. Have I laid out my research plans? Does the patient who's involved understand what their rights are in terms of if there's an adverse event associated with it? So in terms of, are there differences? It's more related to what the patient is told and understood, and you're not they're not being misled or promise the mountain and they get a molehill in terms of information and background and support when they are basically volunteering to commit to the research.
Another question for Jason Spector. Can you speak to working as a surgeon while also being an entrepreneur, and how do you balance that? And as a current medical student interested in the intersection, they've been directed many times to seek an easier specialty to allow time to build or avoid a practice altogether and focus on business, which they don't intend to do. So how do you balance what you're doing there?
Well, there's no way around it. It is a lot of work. There's a lot of shoehorning in, meetings, whether it's in between cases or in the evening or working on things on the weekends. There's a lot of work. There's no way around it. But I would say that my experience as a surgeon, like I said in the beginning, was crucial to allowing me to see the potential applications of, several different technologies. It's a huge advantage to be both the developer of a technology and the end user. And when it comes time to convincing investors, when it comes time to understanding the strategic, course that we should take in terms of how, what we're going to deploy and how we're going to do it, and knowing the sales force for a variety of different companies, these are all huge advantages we have because a company that doesn't have someone who has the perspective or those sort of network connections, it's much harder to break into, the clinical arena. So it's hard work, but if you're willing to put in the time, it can pay off.
I certainly can't speak to that directly, so not being an academic and an inventor, but being the guy that works with that academic inventor and trying to balance the company's needs and challenges, bandwidth matched against his. I can certainly pair it, but it's a heck of a lot of work on Jason because there's the vast majority of the calls that the company has with the inventor are after business hours, right? We're leveraging time that's outside of his clinical practice, surgical practice, academic practice. So he's working at least 2 jobs, if not more.
Yeah, and I'll just add on again, as long as you're productive in your primary job, no one will question what you're doing. And I'm, happy and proud to say, been quite productive in my day job, both as a clinician and as the PI of a lab. So again, it's the amount of time you're willing to put in, and you of course have to have great teams in all aspects. You can't, multiply yourself, but if you have, great people working with you clinically, whether it's your residents, it's your physician extenders, your colleagues, your office staff in the lab, same thing, the people in your lab who, can really take things independently with some instruction. And then, of course, the company, we've been fortunate to be blessed with not only amazing, research scientists, but having someone like Tom who has the experience and the capability to drive the bus forward. That allows me to, do all these different things.
And Tom, are you balancing your R&D team in-house with some of the work that Jason is doing in his lab? Is there any crosstalk in terms of the innovation?
Yeah, there's that that issue comes up, a lot, and in a lot of different aspects. Maybe I'll start with the business aspect. And I say this to teams a lot over the years. The research group is focused on asking really, really interesting questions. The product development folks are tasked with answering really, really difficult problems, right? And those are two very different disciplines. And so balancing those, the innovators, the scientists, the labs, asking really good, crazy fun questions to the pragmatic engineering, problem solving, deliverable, it's a different culture, and it's a balancing act, and one that I think leadership has to make sure that the appropriate levels are being achieved, because everyone just can't run off and do one thing. But two, also, you have to worry about intellectual property. You have to worry about ethics and professionalism. You have to worry about cross-contamination of research goals and outcomes. So you have to think through, if you're going to be doing things at the inventor's lab or CTL or any academic lab, whether it's your inventor or another. You have to be sensitive to what your internal research group is doing versus what your external research group is doing. And so it is. It's a constant discussion, balancing act, and how you, at the end of the day, how do you make sure that your intellectual property is protected, that you have the strongest barriers to entry and runway available for your innovation as possible, while also maintaining that engine, that entry, that interest, that what's next engine that's going to drive that's going to propel the company beyond its current product or technology offering.
Let's go back just a second for another question. So to Mark, how does the FDA determine the authenticity of the data provided by CROs? What happens if there are rogue CROs that produce false data?
Couple of things. FDA has a compliance arm, and they also have a review arm. And the review arm always asks the question, is this too good to be true? The compliance arm are kind of the policemen or the cops. You're guilty until proven innocent, which is a balancing act that the FDA has to deal with. But in terms of the validity of the data, most of the initial inquiries into data validity come from the reviewers. Something doesn't make sense, the follow-up doesn't appear to be appropriate, and the patient safety is the other driver of those compliance actions. So if you're seeing adverse events during the course of a study, what's happening, why is it happening? The investigational device exemption, which is the IDE, as the acronym, study where you're collecting clinical data. That's where FDA is paying attention to what's happening in terms of adverse events. Is the company following those patients up as they proposed in their protocol? Those are the types of things that kind of key FDA into looking deeper at the data. And then also, if the data is perfect, FDA is going to say that doesn't seem reality, and will actually send investigators out to audit the investigational sites.
Mark, I'm shocked to hear you say that a company might think their data is perfect.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. One of the cases I was involved in, everything they had was perfect. Within 2 months of the getting cleared, the company admitted that it had falsified the data and ultimately ended up getting closed down. I don't know what prompted them to do that. It was a fairly simple product, but
from the company side, investor side, that's like 101, right? The last thing you want to do is burn personal capital, real capital, intellectual capital. I can't imagine that that whoever provided that data to Mark on that, in that particular instance, my guess is they never came back in front of the FDA again, because that's, you probably get one shot at that. So
Yeah, I think they ended up in jail, but that's beside the point.
there you go. There you go. So, yeah, CEOs like me, we spend a lot of time focused on, because all we have to sell at the FDA is data. I mean, all it is science, and the quality of that data package is 100% what you're relying on. That's 100% what you're investing in, and how much time and energy you put into that, is gonna be your return on investment. And so it's critical that you use, extraordinarily well vetted CROs, guys have been doing this for a long, long time. This is not their first time doing it. That you have IDEs that are bulletproof, that you are addressing patient safety issues, because the last thing you want is a patient death, whether it's your product or by accident. It's going to kill the IDE, and it's probably going to kill the company. So yeah, you pay an awful lot of attention to that from a corporate perspective.
And I would follow up with that in terms of, if you're doing a study and something that you didn't expect is coming up, I would go talk to FDA as soon as it comes up. In other words, here's what we think it is and why, but do you need to go back and modify the protocol? You need to incorporate other patient safety activities. Those are the things that buy you, as you said, buy you credibility with the agency. If you try to cover it up or hide it, eventually it's going to come out, and either you've put patients at risk, and that's where FDA kind of focuses its attention. When you're doing a study, if a safety risk comes up, they may tell you to stop enrolling until it's addressed.
We have a number of questions on what's happening with the FDA now, but maybe we can hold that for a few minutes and talk a bit more about maybe talk about the best way to approach pre-sub meetings, Mark and Tom. What's the best way to prepare for some of these pre-sub meetings, these early FDA meetings? Jason.
Well, the pre-sub meetings are your opportunity to get FDA's input on what you're proposing, planning, and here, in other words, they're going to ask you, what have you conducted a risk analysis? What did that risk analysis demonstrate or show? And how are you planning to minimize those risks while studying your product? You may not know, but you can say, here's our understanding, here's our best guess at how to approach it. FDA, do you have suggestions? And FDA staff will give you free consultation on what you're doing appears to address the issue, or doesn't quite address this issue, but here's something you could do to potentially address an issue that you're facing. And in terms of the pre-submission itself, don't go in with in other words, here's everything, dumping everything in a basket and dump it on FDA's desk and say, what do you think? No, you should be, what are the decisions as a company that you need are critical to either move forward, the go, no go type question? What's critical in terms of your being able to afford to do the study? And is it even plausible? Those are the type of questions that a pre-sub should be focusing in on. It's the bigger picture questions. You can get just by emailing the FDA, you can get your small questions answered. It's, as a company and as a startup, you're trying to balance, here's how much money I have as an investment here, and I need to have these milestones in place. And if you get FDA's input early, you can save yourself a lot of headaches and a lot of money. Tom, what do you? Yeah. You're shaking your head. Yes.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, it's don't ask the easy questions. Ask the really, really hard questions. Ask the questions that you don't have answers to, because that's what you're there for, right? Here's an area that If you don't agree with our approach, it's going to flip us into a 1,000-patient, 10-year IDE study versus either a de novo or maybe a 510K, right? So that is a huge inflection for a company, and being able to get that answer from the FDA early is one of the things that we took home from our pre-sub for sure. So if you've got, so you lay out your product development plan to the FDA or to yourself, and you identify, these are the 3 questions that I really need answers to. I'm 99% confident that I know how to conduct a 10993 panel and get my safety and toxicity data. But what about this animal study to prove out performance characteristics? If that's the question that you're asking, is this protocol crazy, or is this going to meet pass muster with the FDA? Ask the really hard questions. Get the FDA's input on your, to Mark's point, go no go decisions. Because that's what you really want. That's what you really want to de-risk in the pre-sub, and it gives you a chance to familiarize your review team with, hey, this is what we're thinking. It's good science, right? And then you take the feedback, and then you come back to them however many months later with your actual formal submission, and they see that you took their, you heeded their advice. You're answering their questions. You're trying to address them in a highly scientific, pragmatic way.
And I would add, if you don't agree with FDA's position, then provide the rationale on why what they proposed doesn't make sense, either from a monetary, safety, or effectiveness standpoint. FDA is willing to change their position if you give them, here's why we think what you suggested is not feasible. Here's what we believe is feasible. What do you think? And that type of interaction with FDA gets you the furthest, the fastest.
In my experience, for sure.
And staying on this topic a bit in terms of the pre-sub meetings, do you recommend working with consultants? And is there a particular way to prepare for the pre-sub meetings, a particular way to think about it? Somebody's been asking about a 513G pathway and wanting to classify their device that way. I'm not even familiar.
Again, 513G is a request for class or designation. In other words, is the regulatory path we're proposing even appropriate? In other words, is my product a drug, a combination product, etc. And the 513G is, here's what we think it's classified as, here's why we think so. FDA, do you agree? And FDA will respond back, no, it doesn't fit the drug component. It does or doesn't fit the combination product, and it's a device lead. It's a combination product, and it's a drug or a biologics lead. We've thrown a lot of alphabet soup out there. The pre-market notification process is a 510K, and I like to call it the Me Too device. I'm just like something else on the market. I'm as safe and effective as, and here's the data that supports that. Then you have the investigational device exemption, or IDE, which is the clinical study used to support, and it can be either a PMA, which is a pre-market approval application, a de novo, which is the automatic reevaluation of class 3 designation, in other words, the alternative to a PMA. And then there's a third group that's not widely used, humanitarian use, but that's special small populations that you're trying to demonstrate their safety and probable benefit, not safety and effectiveness like a PMA or a de novo.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but the request for designation is binding. That kind of forces the FDA to write a statement.
Yeah, it's binding to the FDA, and that's the reason why people go through it. But most of the requests for designation, it's fairly clear what it is. But if you want, I need that checkbox for my investors, you can go through that process.
Yeah.
And Tom, what about working with consultants? Have you done that, and thoughts about that?
Well, always being in fairly early stage companies, we work with a lot of consultants. Everything we do is fractional, right? You're trying to leverage as best you can. But even in very large organizations, and I am a huge believer in know what you don't know, and go out and find the people that do know it, and try to bolster your gaps. So even if you're at Johnson and Johnson or Pfizer or whatever, and you've got the broadest team of scientific and regulatory and quality and clinical, whatever it is, there's always going to be a question where you're like, am I the foremost expert on this? And why not reach out and bring a consultant in that can help you address that? And I think Mark can answer better than me, but I think the FDA appreciates that you recognize where your areas are, that you need help, and you're reaching out and you're getting the best possible scientific support that you possibly can.
And I'll sort of follow that and say when you're early stage, so when we were getting off the ground, when the company was just founded, the first, the foundational steps besides negotiating the license to the technology that I developed, finding lab space, was getting a regulatory strategy advisor, because didn't have any expertise between me and my brother who I co-founded the company with. He had no medical device background. So that was, foundational. And also a product development specialist. Again, we had no pathway to do it. So as Tom mentioned, these fractional aspects are crucial, because you don't want to take on someone full-time and have a full-time employee if you don't have to do that when money is, scarce. So if you're early stage, I mean, we're still early stage now, but when you're really just getting off the ground, you absolutely need that kind of expertise, because no one else has it.
And I, being a consultant, I'm going to give you two bits of advice. Get somebody who's going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you can't get there from here, know that up front. There are a lot of consulting groups out there that will lead you along the primrose path of, we can get you there. And knowing full well it's not going to go or fly for that regulatory path. And then we'll bill you again when, we can go through an appeal process. I'm one of those, I don't take that approach. I start off with companies. I said, I'm going to give you the good, bad, and the ugly, and you may not like what I have to say, but here's my interpretation of the law, the regulation, and past FDA precedents. And Donna said I was there for 20 years. It was actually over 30 years. And it's one of those, I'm retired. I'm collecting a pension. I don't have to consult. So I do the consulting, to me, just to kind of keep myself interested. And when you tell a company that that's your approach is that I'm not in for billable hours, that's the type of consultant you want. Is the one that's trying to earn a living as a consultant. You want to probably run the other direction.
I will also say, I think Mark is on a key point. The best consultants, the guys that are going to do exactly what Mark just said, they rarely want to work for one company or one technology. They don't want to be pigeonholed. They want, the reason that they're doing consulting is so that they can touch 100 things and stay engaged, keep their brain engaged. So the best consultants probably don't want to be full-time with you.
Well, that's the other part of being the consultant I am. I started off as division director of the division of neuro, in general neuro and reconstructive surgery. So as the FDA grew, the neuro got spun off, physical medicine got spun off, general and plastic surgery, like your group, got sent off with wound care products. And the whole idea is I try to stay at a strategic level, and FDA has actually gotten to the point where they have what are called E-Star submissions. It's basically TurboTax for regulatory submissions to the FDA. So they have one for a PMA, one for a de novo, one for humanitarian use, one for an IDE, pre-submissions. And it basically asks you a question, and depending on how you answer that question, it'll tell you need more information here or there. So for the groups that are out there and they don't understand the regulatory, I would say get a consultant, but know full well that you can now go online. In fact, that was one of the projects I was involved in towards the end of my career, was developing these templates, because they're the same questions each time. It's just, how do I apply it to my device or my technology?
Well, I just follow that and say, again, coming into this process completely naive about the regulatory regime, even though and appreciate Mark, making it a little more, navigatable. You need someone, I always equate it to like if you bring someone who's not a surgeon into the OR, you can tell them the steps of how to do an operation, but they're not going to be able to do an operation. It is, a system in and of itself. And like every other system, the people within that system know other people know how to navigate it. And even to this day, it still sort of sends shivers down my spine trying to understand the regulatory system. And I always look at it, it's like diplomatic speak, even though the FDA will, they'll never tell you. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my experience is you never get exactly an answer. You get kind of something along the lines of information, but it's never specific. So you need that diplomat or that interpreter to, tell you, okay, this is what this means. And again, just my experience is unless that is your background, and very few people have that background, you really need in the beginning these regulatory, and same goes for product development. It's an entire different science. You can be an engineer, you can be brilliant. You have no idea about product development until you start doing it.
Start with control, right? Well, and I can't imagine anyone being able to raise money if you don't have regulatory expertise, manufacturing expertise, product development expertise, compliance expertise. If you don't have expertise, I can't imagine an investor willing to write a check.
Unless, I was gonna say, unless you're very charming. And I saw somebody on the questions, how do you find consultants? So I'll give you an example. In the beginning, before Tom came on, when we were looking for a regulatory consultant, my brother was searching around online, and our predicate device that we thought would be appropriate was something called Integra. It's early dermal template, and he noticed that the person who is in the plastic surgery devices division who signed off on Integra had a consulting company, much, like Mark. And so reached out to him thinking, hey, that seems like a person who might be good to give us regulatory strategy advice. And he turned out to be, terrific. So that's the answer to how you find it. You search around, and again, like any network, if you know people, maybe they don't know the person, but they know someone who can help you. Just use your network, leverage your network. That's how you find these people.
And there's a good source if you start with LinkedIn and type in regulatory. You'll find many ex-FDA folks, and it doesn't have to be an ex-FDA folk or reviewer or staff. They will be able to put you in touch with people who deal with that area or issue, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be biocompatibility, whether it's sterility. Many of them use LinkedIn as kind of the global location. And then just, I hate to say it, Google business does itself a disservice because regulatory and consulting isn't confined to the locale, and making you as part of their business model have a location that an area of coverage. I have clients in France, Italy, Australia. So Google Maps doesn't help, and they change their business model. So start with LinkedIn because it's a more national or international approach.
So let's turn to a little bit of the elephant in the room here. Some folks here are quite interested in the things going on in the FDA. Some comment that much of this seems to pertain to the old FDA, but the old FDA may still be the new FDA. Any comments, Mark, and on?
Well, I saw the first question relating to what's happening with all the cuts.
Yeah,
it's definitely putting shockwaves through groups. One of the senior managers that was let go was somebody I trained, and she went into work on a Monday and been a senior manager for 15 years and, got her walking papers. To the staff who do the reviews and are, are basically paid by user fees, were let go because they weren't full-time civil servants. They were in their 3-year probationary period and were, quote, fired for performance. Well, one of the requirements to maintain your position during that probation is to have good performance. So they're confused of, was I or wasn't I not doing a good job? So there's a lot of concern within the staff of what's going on. As far as the second part of that third question that was on the list, do you expect the FDA pathway to be loosened? FDA is bound by the laws, so the laws would have to be changed to loosen those regulations. So I don't think it's going to change. What's going to change is how long it takes to get through that process. The expectation of loosening of pathway, a lot of the advancements in moving things along, reclassification of a device from class 3 to class 2, those are usually initiated by the review staff saying, hey, we've seen this so many times, let's do that. Well, if you're removing staff that take the time away from their reviews to do reclassification, it takes you away from doing the reviews. User fees had allowed FDA to add staff to look at reclassifying. In other words, can we make it easier on the industry because we understand that technology and we can now focus on something else? I think that's going to be the biggest loss, is if you keep reducing the amount of staff, you can't do things that would actually reduce the regulatory burden over time. As a reviewer manager, I help reclassify hips, knees, spinal implants, pedicle screws, and it took a lot of effort, but the reclassification did reduce the regulatory burden.
Mark, I've heard a couple of rumors that the pre-sub process has kind of tapped the brakes as a function of resourcing. Just now I have enough people to actually do the pre-sub reviews.
That is a good possibility in terms of they open it up, but the thing that gets me, and I'm now an outsider, the user fees were meant to allow staff time to do the things that helped reduce the regulatory burden. Yet if you're reducing the staff that do that, you're basically telling this industry, okay, we're going to take that away, we're going to take the pre-sub away. It's going to actually add to the time to get things to market.
Well, the advice I'll give to the people on this call who don't have any familiarity with FDA regulatory schema is read up on it. You're not going to become an expert by any means, but there's certainly enough out there, or find people who do have some experience, and it's very helpful just to get some background information, not go into it completely naive. And as Mark said, there's a lot of alphabet soups and people were thrown around in the beginning and I had no idea what they were talking about. And yeah, you just got to get in, take the time to understand it, to learn it, at least get the basics, understand you will never be an expert, nor do you really want to be an expert. You can hire the experts to do that.
Okay. So it sounds like, changes afoot, but maybe not so many in terms of the burden of proof and safety and efficacy. Any last thoughts from our panelists before we wrap up here?
One thing that I don't know, if, I mentioned combination products. Having your product designated as a device lead, people are, you try to force their product into that mode. And a combination product is a combination of a drug, a biologic, or a device. And you can have one, two, or all three in combination. Those are going to be very critical in terms of getting your product approved. Because if it's a drug lead, you're talking multiple studies. They try to go through the device side, and it's what's the primary mode of action. Those are terms that you have to become familiar with if you're going into a biologic combined with a device or drug combined with a biologic. And that's even, you talk about a regulatory maze, just going through one center with a single entity product is as difficult as that is. The combination product gets multiplied because now you have two centers trying to manipulate or guide the products.
Yeah.
Last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say a guy who's been doing this, for a very, very long time. This is a fantastic industry. You get to lay your head on your pillow every single night knowing that you're improving patient care. You get to work with the smartest people on the planet. These are truly, even the guy who finished last in class in Jason's medical school is a hell of a lot smarter than I am. These are fantastic people you get to work with. You get to work with people that are passionate about innovation, passionate about bringing change, and God forbid that something happens to the FDA where they stop caring about patient safety, because we've got the best medical care in the world. People fly from all around the globe to go see Jason Spector because he offers the best. He offers the best, and there's a reason for that. And so I encourage anybody on the call, stick with it. It's a lot of fun, and absolutely roll with it.
I thought Tom wasn't going to bring up the fact I told him I finished last in medical school, but besides that, I'd like to echo what Tom said, and again, this is a long road. It's a challenging road, but in the end, the thrill of being an entrepreneur is there's nothing else like it. I mean, again, you can liken it to the world of surgery, and you're sort of operating by yourself. It's the sort of challenge of getting through a tough case, but it's building the team, building the product, and I'm happy to say we're literally 3 weeks away from our first application in patients. So it's been a nearly 10-year journey, which is par for the course, but it's been by far one of the most satisfying things that I've been able to do and be a part of. And again, anyone out there who's thinking of doing it, be prepared for the long term. Surround yourself with smart people, leverage your network. Think about what you want to do. You really do have to have an idea that has a decent size, total addressable market. If you want to attract investors, that has, a lot of bearing on whether or not you'll be ultimately successful. And in terms of, regulatory pathways, if you can, keep it simple. Our device is a 510K. It has no growth factors, has no cells, and is not a PMA because it's not put inside. So that is a huge advantage as well in terms of not only, ease to market, but cost to market. So all those things taken together, it's been great. And I hope we have really good news in a few weeks in terms of how things are working out with patients.
My last parting thought: don't be afraid of new, innovative things with biologics and cells. If it's going to better the patient care, pursue it. But again, get early feedback before you start down that path.
Thank you all to the panelists. Just a couple of notes. I think we will have a total panel directed to medical devices and artificial intelligence coming up. We'll also have a panel talking about early thinking about reimbursements. But I hope, as we wrap up, I hope everyone's walking away with a new perspective and actionable takeaways to tackle the challenges of innovation. And thank you once again to our incredible panelists and to everyone for your thoughtful questions and engagement. And until next time, please stay inspired and keep innovating. And we'll see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Don.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.